rather than me up here telling you what I think you should be doing, is there anything in particular that you'd like us to cover over the next couple of weeks? Any particular topics or challenges you're having? Or
I'm completely new to gardening, so I don't know where to start.
okay, all right, that's fair enough. Well, we keep the information, you know, as informative, but we keep that in mind. Beginner gardeners. Anybody else just starting in gardening?
Yeah, I'm a container gardener, and I'd like to know what should I do in the winter with all the plants in my containers.
Okay, yeah, we cover that, yeah. It's a good one. I'd say you're not alone. I think there's plenty of people, including myself, who grow a lot of stuff in containers.
Yeah, like that now, I'm new to gardening as well.
Right.
So I'd be interested in learning about, say, the seeds.
Yeah.
And taking cuttings.
Okay, well I'm actually going to cover a little bit of that tonight. This is where I do myself out of a job, teaching people how to grow their own plants. So we do that, I'm going to cover that tonight. And the basics of what I do tonight you can do right throughout the year in terms of sowing plants for seed. It's a great way to get into gardening. Anybody else?
How to utilise your tunnel would be the best in winter time?
Okay, yeah. Well, we'll touch a little bit on that tonight, but during the course we'll be covering growing vegetables and fruit and what to be doing in the tunnel. And even the sowing of the seeds that I'll do tonight and taking the cuttings, you could use that in your tunnel as well. Anyone moss on the lawn? Or?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah. So we cover that tonight as well, and just what to do with the lawn at this time of year, because people tend to stop mowing the grass over the winter period, and that's not always the best thing. So a few hands there going. Anybody else with? Yeah?
Protecting plants from frost.
Okay, I think you're going to cover that, Meg, aren't you? Yeah. Just, we'll talk about that, yeah.
Okay, lifting stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I have lifted a few of my begonias and I brought them with me tonight, so I'll show you how to do that.
I'd like to know what to cut back.
Right, pruning. Okay. Yeah. Are we going to do a bit of that tonight? Yeah. Are you writing all this down, yeah?
Yeah.
Sure. All right, you talk. Anything else? You give us a good flavour there, and I think we're going to cover most of that anyway, but we might ask the question again next week. So I'm going to show you a little bit about seed sowing, how to sow seed. There's more seeds up here, guys, if you want to come up, anybody wants to come up a little bit closer. But seeds are a great way of growing your own plants. And there's so many different plants that can be grown from seed, not just bedding plants and vegetables. Somebody brought me in actually a little cutting of euonymus tonight, and I was just explaining that you can actually sow many shrubs from seed as well. Trees, ash trees and beech are all sown from seed. So there's many, many plants that can be sown from seed. One of the great things about them is that they're very cheap to buy. So these are the Canterbury bells, or often called the cup and saucer plant. And they're an old cottage garden plant that were grown for many years. My grandmother used to grow these. Very simple from seed. There's 800 seeds in a pack. And, do I take, oh yeah, that's the pack. 800 seeds in there. And you don't need to sow them all at one go, but for $2.49, 800 seeds, they're great value. And it's a very simple plant to grow. And for most seeds, they want the same sort of conditions. They want heat and they want moisture. They're the two real ingredients that they need to germinate. And if your house is anything like my house, it's sweltering with heat at the moment with the radiators on. So there's plenty of warmth indoors to start seeds off this time of year. So if you've got a windowsill with a radiator underneath it, that's the ideal location to actually start sowing seed. So all you need is a tray, simple tray. So it can be something like this. It can be a flower pot. It can be a margarine tin with holes in the bottom. Anything that has drainage and that would hold some compost. And what I normally advise is, depending on the amount of seed in the packet, determines obviously the size of container that you're going to need to sow them. 800 seeds you don't need to sow. These are all foil wrapped, so they'll actually, if you roll them after opening the pack and taking out some seed, you can always reseal it back and that seed will hold. And generally it has the name of the Canterbury bells on the packet anyway. So you can just store those in a cupboard or in maybe a brown envelope or somewhere like that, and you can sow more than next spring or next summer. So you've got the ideal conditions indoors at the moment. You've got the warmth and the light at the windowsill. So say something like Canterbury bells, and The other plants you could be sowing at this time of year will be things like lupins, again a great old cottage garden plant that flowers for many years, and English marigolds, calendulas. They'll actually grow if you sow them just outdoors, if you put them out on the ground. Or if you have them in your garden, you'll often see them seeding, self-seeding, English marigolds. Very, very simple. Violas. What else could you do? Sweet peas. If you sow sweet pea at this time of year, it will actually flower better next spring or next summer, because the plants tend to be stronger and you just get longer blooms from them. So sweet pea, any of the prize-winning sweet peas that you see at Chelsea are always sown at this time of year indoors. And they're frost hardy, so you can plant them outdoors anytime, say from late January, February onwards, and they're totally frost hardy. So if you get a bit of hard weather, it's not going to affect them. So it's a great time actually to sow sweet pea, rather than in January and February. You're getting 2 or 3 months ahead of yourself. So sweet peas will be an ideal one. For those of you that have maybe the veg garden, again you can do the same thing. Things like peas can be sown at this time of year. There's a great variety called Meteor, which is a very hardy winter, and it's a early summer variety. So if you sow it at this time of year, it will grow during the winter period and then produce its pods in June or July of next year. And there's broad beans. There's many of the kind of vegetable plants that you can sow as well. And really the sowing is well, you can sow the peas inside if you want and start them off and then transplant them outside. Or if you have the tunnel, you can start them off indoors, get them up, within 3 weeks they'll be this high. And then you can plant them out in the tunnel and grow them on. Or plant them outdoors, just harden them off a little bit first of all. Or indeed you could sow some outdoors as well. And with a lot of seeds, you can sow them both indoors and out of doors. And what you tend to get is obviously the indoor ones come up quicker and earlier, and the outdoor ones will be that little bit later. Particularly next spring, it's a good idea. If you want to say grow cabbage plants or some bedding plants early, start some indoors, and you could also start some outdoors from seed.
But they're not sorry.
Well, no, it depends on any of the ones I'm showing you at the moment are all frost hardy, so they'll tolerate the frost. So plants like lupins, delphiniums, Canterbury bells, all of those. Now, if it was something like a French marigold or a begonia, no, you wouldn't sow it at this time of year because they're frost tender. So what you're sowing, and it'll tell you on the back of the pack, it'll generally say hardy perennial, hardy annual, and the word hardy means that it'll tolerate frost. Now, if we get the sort of winter we had 2 years ago, that's a different thing. So, you would need your tunnel at that stage. But for most normal winters that we have, the plants I'm showing you tonight are perfectly hardy. I was going to say something else, but I forgot. But anyway, we go through it. So all you need is some compost, and this is quite a good one. It's made here by Shamrock, by Bordemona, Grow-Wise. It has a John Ennis-based compost in it. And the John Ennis gives it a kind of a soil base. So it's a very good compost for not just sowing seed, but also for taking cuttings as well. The other plants you could be sowing at this time of year are herbs. So things like parsley, which is frost hardy, lavenders, all of those can be sown from seed at this time of year as well. And the sowing is exactly the same. So that's the compost I use. You just firm down the compost as much as possible. It doesn't have to be perfect. You don't need to sieve it or anything like that. And all you do is shake out the seed. So I'm going to sow about half the packet. So there's about 400 seed there. Generally a tray like that will take anything up to 300 or 400 seed. No problem whatsoever. So if it's only a few sweet peas, if it's a dozen, all you use is a tiny little pot. So it really depends. And it's a matter of sowing the seed then nice and evenly across the container like that, as even as possible. The compost generally is moist enough when you get it, but if it's very dry, for somebody, if it seems to be very dry, do add a little bit of water to it. So ideally it should be, when you squeeze the compost, maybe 1 drip of water might come out from it, but it shouldn't be running with water, and conversely it shouldn't be too dry. So it wants to be reasonably moist. Once it's sown like that, you can sieve over a little bit of compost then, over the top of it, and then get some cling film. This is where I always follow up with the wife, rather than cling film. One of the first programs I did on TV3, I was doing exactly what I'm doing now, and I brought the roll of cling film. When I went home, she said, I thought that cling film looks very familiar. So all you do is cover the tray with cling film and then leave it on a windowsill. Now the reason we use cling film is that any water that transpires or evaporates hits the cling film and falls back down again. So it fogs up. So it saves you having to water the seeds. So leave the cling film on until they germinate. This time of year it'll take about 2 weeks. Once you see the green shoots coming, just peel back the cling film and the plants will grow on. And it's as simple as that. And I brought in some wallflowers. Where did I put them? Well, these are lettuce that were sown about 5-6 weeks ago. Oh yeah, see them here. So these are little wallflower plants that were sown from seed about a month ago, about 5-6 weeks ago. You can see already they're good and strong, and they can be planted directly out of doors now into the garden. They're totally frost hardy, and they'll flower then next March, April. They often produce some flowers during the winter if we get the sort of weather we're getting now, which is spring-like, that kind of mild, cool, that mild weather. You'll often get an odd flower on them. What I would actually do with them at this stage is take the tops out of them, pinch them out like that, and get them to bush out more. So if you take the top out of the plant, you get lots of side shoots coming on the plant. So that's a good idea. When the plants are so high, just take the top out of them. It fattens them out. And even though you might be losing a little bit of the flower, what about you'll end up with possibly 8 or 9 good strong shoots on the side of that. So it'll end up with a fatter, bushier plant. So that's it. That's how we sow plants from seed. It's as simple as that.
At what stage do you transplant it from the first pot into the...
Well, when they're kind of a manageable size, so say, about 1.5 inches, 2 inches, whenever you can comfortably manage them. Normally we wait until generally when the seed germinates, you get two seedlings, two kind of seed leaves, and then the true leaf comes up between the two. So once you see that coming through, that's the time that you can transplant them. Whenever they're manageable, it'll all depend on some of the seeds will be faster germinating than others, will be quicker growing. So whenever you're comfortable enough, if you leave them in the tray for a month, they'll be perfectly okay. So, within a month, 6 weeks, or a month, 4 weeks period, you could transplant them into bigger pots. Into something like this, or you can put them back into this size, this sort of tray, but obviously just put maybe a dozen plants in, so you give them a bit of space. So I've sown 400 in this. So you could have trays like this, or pots, or individual pots, anything at all that will hold compost and that there's drainage, the water can come through. You can put your seedlings into. So if I was I'd put about a dozen or maybe 15 Canterbury bells back into this pot, or into a tray that size with compost, and that will hold them then all winter until April of next year. And grow on.
What causes this mould to come sometimes when you have seeds set in a tray?
If the compost is too wet, like naturally enough, when you put the cling film over them, you're creating that microclimate, humid. Like it's like when I walk into a tunnel, the glasses fog up straight away. You know that feeling?
I do.
So it's the same thing. When you get that high humidity, diseases are like any disease, like any fungi. The more humid it is, the quicker the disease. Now, if that's a problem, you can use a fungicide. You can use sulfur or one of the fungicides and put that onto the tray before you put the cling film over. But generally, if the compost isn't too moist, you won't get that problem. You won't get that problem. It's not too wet. And that's certainly moist enough. And you can have a look at this. And I didn't add that straight from the bag, so it's it's moist enough. You can feel the moisture in it. So there's no need to add any more water. And there's no need to add water until they germinate, and even probably 2 weeks after they germinate, there's no need. You're better to keep them slightly on the dry side, because it tends to hold them back. If they're getting lots of water, they tend to get very leggy very quickly. So if you keep them slightly dry, it's better. Even that plant I took up there, it's not very moist. It's moist, but it's not wet. So, and the lads are keeping them like that because it keeps the plant nice and short. Whereas if it's very wet, they tend to get very leggy, and the roots can rot, and you can get problems coming into them. So it's better just to keep them slightly dry. So the same principle applies to sweet peas, any of the others I showed you there, herbs, you can sow from seed.
Sorry, is it too late to sow the wallflowers now?
It's a tad late, yeah, for them. They would be flowering kind of May, June, and they wouldn't last. Like really, wallflowers should be sown August is the ideal time, or early September at the latest, just to give them. Now if you did sow them, they would flower next year, but they'll be coming into flower in May, and then when the heat of the summer comes, they go over very quickly, whereas these will start flowering in March. So you'll have March, April, May, you'll have 3 months of colour from these, because the temperatures are a lot cooler that time of year, so they tend to last longer. So